So experience is always the best teacher. And there is going to be I've shown you in the past few days that you can find all of our lessons on the website. And when I went into our website today, our web moderator is working on it. The link that is in our website today for Vote by Design links you to the handbook that's used for teachers who are going to use the NearPod version. There will be a link to the actual NearPod lessons, and there will be a link to the Google Slides program within a couple of days, I'm assuming. So be patient with us on that. But what I'd like to do is to first introduce you to Lisa K. Solomon. And this, by the way, is from the Vote by Design website. And it shows you the lesson plans. That's the field guide that is currently linked to ours. There are student offerings, so the student can go through the NearPod version by him or herself. There are 3 modules. There are supplementary materials here for teachers, which you can use even if you're using the Google version, because these are all PDF forms. So if you're in a classroom, you can actually use it with the kids in the classroom. All right, this is Lisa K, and I'm going to start her at about 4 minutes so that we don't.
So this experience, but how to really, how.
I'm going to stop her for a second. So she's going to go through a section of the lesson that you're going to experience in Google Slides today. And she asks the students first if they're eligible to vote, and then she starts the actual lesson. So I'm going to turn it over to her for about 15 minutes, I think it is, and then I'll stop and we'll come back to the group here. Let me know if you're having any trouble hearing or seeing.
Down bit by bit. And so first, I'm just curious to get a sense of who is on the call today. I know you hail from many different geographies all over the country. And I'm curious to see how many of you will be voting in November in the upcoming election for the first time. So this is our first opportunity to engage with NearPod's poll. So all you need to do is to quickly answer, I am eligible to vote, or no, I'm not eligible. So let's see who we have here.
And at this point, the students would be using a link in their chat box.
For those of you joining, again, just go to the chat and you will find a link to NearPod, and that will allow you to join us on where we are on this NearPod while we are also connected in Zoom. Okay, so the majority of us are not yet eligible, and I'm going to share the results here, and that's great. So for those of you that are eligible, what an extraordinary opportunity to make your voice known, moving from student to citizen as you put your voice forward for shaping your future. For those not yet eligible, you are practicing how to think like a voter, not just how to get a right answer in your history class, but how to really think critically about what you care about in thinking about this election. And of course, engaging with others that can vote in the fall. All right, second question. When you think about voting for a presidential candidate, and this goes for whether you are voting in November or not, do you tend to vote for a presidential candidate based on policy issues, what their stances are regarding things that you care about, or the individual leadership traits? So again, I'm going to launch a poll here to get a sense of your responses. You don't have to think too much on this, just your initial response. Okay. Sharing the results. All right, fantastic. It looks like most of you think primarily based on policy. This is very consistent with the work I've been doing, particularly with high school students that really engage on a specific issue that they often feel very, very passionately about. All right, last question for now. When you think about making the choice of who will be our next president, do you have clarity on the personal experience, leadership qualities, and attributes that are important to you in voting for a candidate? Do you care if they have certain kinds of experiences or certain leadership traits? So I'm going to ask that you answer this final quick poll.
Why I can't do that?
Okay, I'm going to share the results here. So most of us have some clarity, which is great. It's just fantastic. That's what this experience is designed to do, is to help deliver that clarity, to help you connect the job to be done of the president and clarity on what leadership qualities then matter most in order to do that job to the best of their ability. Right? So what is the president's job? So here I'm going to introduce you to a different kind of way to engage. This is a collaborate board, and what I'd like you to do is just very quickly share, what do you think the president's job is? So you have the ability to add your own, or you can upvote someone else's that you see. So one that many people say right off the bat, right, Commander-in-Chief, there you go. Represent the people's voices, lead our country, protect the Constitution, promote equity, promote the common good, serve the people. Fantastic. Be sure to read others. You can upvote them. Be a spokesperson for the people, bring people together, negotiating treaties, serve as a role model. Look at all these things that we believe the president does. Now, this is not a seminar on presidential power. Honestly, that is a whole summer seminar for you and the subject of many, many books and scholarly work. This is not about understanding how the presidential power has shifted over the years, but it is interesting to note all the different opinions we have on the job to be done, and yet we all need to come to some kind of clarity about what it is that we're voting for regarding that job. So very, very interesting. Of course, we know, particularly this group knows, that there is in fact a job description that exists. And the job description sits within Article 2 of the Constitution that the framers wrote over 240 years ago about the executive power that shall be vested in a president of the United States. And at the time they wrote this, this was totally revolutionary. And what they were really focused on, I'm sure many of you know, is to not have a monarchy. That was one of the key things. This is not going to be a king. This is going to be a president that is elected. A very, very innovative concept at the time. And if we boil down, if you look at the Constitution, what the core job description is, right? Many of you probably have jobs right now. Maybe you had to apply for them. Maybe you had to read the job description to see if you were qualified. In this case, the president's duties sit within 7 main areas of activity. Commander-in-Chief being the primary one, executes and enforces laws, appoints cabinet members, signs legislation. A lot of people actually think the president makes legislation, for those that are not as well studied in civics. They negotiate and sign treaties, issue executive order that is supposed to extend or further existing law, or extends pardons, except for impeachment. Turns out the responsibilities are kind of light from a written form. Mostly it's about giving Congress information about the State of the Union and asking Congress for their advice. And also the qualifications are surprisingly slim. To be 35 years old, a natural-born citizen, having lived in the US for 14 years. It is harder to get a manager job at most retail stores than it is from a pure qualification standpoint of becoming president. I think that is so, so interesting that we don't stop to think, should there be stronger qualifications? All right, so now that we've identified the job to be done of the president, what we're going to do now is spend a little time reflecting on what we believe are the best past experiences, leadership qualities, and personal attributes that matter. What you're looking at right now in NearPod is a worksheet that we initially gave when we ran this in person in order to get a sense of how do people rank their priorities? What do they value? So we're going to get a chance to do that here together. So I'm going to ask you in a poll to go through each one of these categories. Once we've identified this job, right, that there is a job description, what do we think matters? So the first thing that people often look at when they think about an experience, a job to be done is, What kind of relevant experience do you have? So in this case, I'm curious to hear, what experience do you think matter most for the job to be done of the US president? So take a few minutes, take a look at the options. Again, no right or wrong answer, more to just get a sense of how do we think about this? Do we have clarity? So I'm going to ask, if you're not yet on mute, to do that. We'll get a chance to share briefly. Okay, I'm going to share the results. Fascinating to see. Lots of different answers on what matters here. You can see we almost have a perfectly situated pie chart. Many of you think legislative experience matters. Some think domestic experience. Community organizing is interesting. International experience. So just notice, as we think about how we're evaluating, do we have clarity about what matters and what we're looking for? Okay, now remember this if you can, because we're going to come back to it in a little bit. Right, the second category we talked about were the leadership qualities. This is certainly something that's been in conversation a lot lately as we've been navigating some very, very difficult times. So what are the leadership qualities that you value in a president? So again, I'm going to give you a minute or so to look through this list and to pick 5 qualities that you value most in a president. I can see some folks are thinking hard about this, as you should. I'm going to share the results here. Again, what's extraordinary, we see a tremendous array of different priorities. Strong communicator and empathetic, leading the pack here. Fair, high integrity, analytical. Interesting to see where we place our values and our priorities. Perhaps you've never thought to actually look specifically for the leadership qualities. Just something to consider. This list, by the way, was culled from doing a lot of research on past surveys and historic perspectives on what matters most in a president. And it turns out we don't agree. And when we start to unpack it, it's very, very different than when we ask, oh, were they a good president or a bad president? How do we know? How do we evaluate? So this allows us to expand our language and how we talk about it. All right, we're going to go to the final category. What are the personal attributes? And perhaps you've never thought about it this way, but our brains do mysterious things. They have biases at work. So this is a chance to actually pause and think about it. Are there certain personal attributes that you value in a president? Give you a minute here to respond. And for those of you that are still shaking, oh, this doesn't factor in. I might argue if you look historically at who has won the presidency, it is often the tallest candidate. So whether or not you go into the voting booth thinking, I want a tall president, these things matter. These unconscious biases play in. We started doing this, for example, early on in the Democratic primaries, and we had a lot of young people say, well, I really want someone healthy and young, but go Bernie. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just a chance to check the congruency of our thinking. Are we being consistent? Do we have a logic behind what we think? I'm going to share the results here. So we see healthy rising to the top, successful, young under 55. That's, of course, not an option for the upcoming election, so to speak, but certainly important to think about what matters. Do we pause? Do we take time? And once we identify what matters, does that allow us to have different conversations with others? We can also use this criteria to better understand our history, to see who has done well in times of crisis, and perhaps what leadership qualities rose to the top. So oftentimes when we ask people, who is your favorite president? They will say Lincoln. And if we look at Lincoln, what's interesting to note is Lincoln had almost no previous experience that was worthwhile. He was certainly not, he didn't come from a strong academic background. He was pretty much self-taught. He was a self-taught lawyer. He was a son of a farmer that did not read, essentially illiterate, but he was a fabulous storyteller. And Lincoln learned how to tell great stories from listening to his father. Lincoln, of course, is known for being incredibly empathic, for building relationships. Doris Kearns Goodwin's Team of Rivals was just beautiful in describing how Lincoln was able to reach across people of difference who had different opinion and bring them into his circle to help advise him, to make sure he was not going to be blindsided by any of his ideas. And of course, if you ask anyone about Lincoln's personal qualities, the first thing they will say is very, very tall, very tall. Contrast that with what a lot of young people say. They say that their favorite president is Barack Obama. I think in part it's because it's what they've seen most recently, Barack Obama being president for the last 8 years. So if you're 16 or 17 or 18, that's a good majority of your life. Barack Obama had tremendous academic excellence, was a professor of law at the University of Chicago, Harvard Law Review. He had some legislative experience. Like Lincoln, an incredible orator, very, very analytical, very disciplined. If you read documentaries or articles on Obama, they will say even as a campaigner, he's extremely disciplined. Of course, youth was a big part of his campaign, and very much championing his wife, a working woman, and being a parent was important to him and something that he was really proud of. Interesting to see, Abigail mentions in the chat, pet ownership is a big one. It is a big one. We don't often think about it, but that is often a really important factor in thinking about caretaking or what choices that you make. So really interesting to think about it from a historic perspective, because oftentimes we think about voting for these candidates based on their platform. But of course, we know now more than ever, the future doesn't necessarily care about your platform. The future is going to throw up new things that the president has to respond to. All right, another thing we can do once we've identified some of the things that we care about is that we can start to listen differently. We can start to actually understand and look for evidence and actually do research in a much more proactive way. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play a bunch of debate clips.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there because we're going to use the same debate clips. One of the reasons that I played that big long section with all of those different forms that are available is because those are the ones that are available to you on the website. So any one of those that you might want to use even outside of the lesson with people that you know, you can find it on the Vote by Design website, which is votebydesign.org. While I'm thinking of it, I'm going to tell you that in addition to the recording of this particular lesson, you're also going to get the deck of slides from this training program. So you have all the links that I used, and you're also going to get the actual deck of slides from for the classroom portion of it. Since that's not yet on the website, I want them available to you right now. So I'm just curious for feedback from you from watching Lisa, who is such a dynamic young woman, present her version of Vote by Design. Anybody want to share?
I like her.
Oh, go ahead, Lori.
Rosemary can go. It doesn't matter. I liked her subtle symbols, her vote and the flag there. I just think subtly they say things of how important it is to her, and you're always looking at it. So I think if we're doing virtual or even in person, it's things we might want to consider is what do we look like and what are we portraying as important.
That's a really interesting point. Thank you. Go ahead, Rosemary. You had an idea too.
I liked her confidence and ease. of sharing the information, because oftentimes if the students don't feel that you are knowledgeable and you are confident in what you're sharing with them, they leave the room mentally. You know, so I thought she was great, to the extent that I even answered. I was
I saw that. I
squinting.
loved it.
I was squinting to see the list, you know, because it was so small, and it prompted me to answer. So that I thought that was great. In addition to the little things in terms of setting the learning environment, to what Lori was saying.
Okay, I was going to say, it wasn't the same thing or something else, talking about the learning environment. Any other observations from anybody? Evelyn.
I thought she did very well.
Oh.
I was just wondering why she didn't have the definitions of the leadership qualities next to the words for the students, for, like, you know, empathetic, and what were the other ones? And what was the other one? A couple of them that you'd have to think like, as adult, I'm like, what the heck do they, I don't remember what they mean. So, you know, I think would help the kids kind of, and then because she's showing these choices, it kind of gives the impression that these are important attributes to have. And so if the definitions are there, they could, you know, it's a learning opportunity along the way for them to kind of understand that, you know, somewhere on that list should be somebody that I'm voting for. And if they don't fall into that, then we may have a problem. So, you know.
Good
And,
point.
you know, if I can piggyback what Janice is saying, I didn't even think about that, but you're right, because at one point she said, oh, well, I see that's taking a little time, you know, for everybody to answer. People were pondering. That's what it was. She said, oh, people are, you know, the students are thinking about what they should say. And I'm to the point Janice just made, perhaps they were trying to decipher what, for example, leadership meant, or something like that, you know?
So you feel like they needed more time because they weren't sure of the actual meaning?
Well, I think that, well, it could be time, but I really think that what Janice had just mentioned about the definitions next to the word, because if the definitions are next to the word, then they're focused on that, and it won't be, oh, so what do they mean by that? Well, you know, leadership to me means, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And in some of our other lessons, we actually provide the teacher with a list of vocabulary that's going to be used during the lesson, so that the teacher ahead of time can determine whether there are things the kids need to know. So rather than take up the time in the lesson of having them read all of those things, I think maybe that's a solution. I made a note of that, so thank you both for that. Melissa, welcome. Glad to see you here. Any other comments about, and Melissa, what we did was just watch a video clip about 15 minutes long of Lisa K. Solomon out at the university, at Stanford University, who wrote the Vote by Design, teach the NearPod version. So you'll get the recorded version and you'll be able to see that, or you can go to the Vote by Design website, and at the very bottom of the educators page, there are two videos that she's made, one actually teaching the lesson and one teaching people how to teach the lesson. So you've got some good reference or resource materials there too. So if any other comments, or go ahead, Evelyn.
The thing that I was thinking about is I'd love to see this extended to candidates other than president. The presidential election happens only every 4 years. And if you're talking to seniors this year, they're not going to be thinking about a presidential election for a while. And whereas in New Jersey, as we know, there's important elections every year. And it could be really interesting to even drill down to every year, the Board of Education is elected. What do you think the attributes there are?
I think that would be a very easy adaptation to make, even using the same slideshows and just focusing in on the candidates that are running for office that particular year, especially if you do it right before the election. This is more generic, and so it can be used at any time. And the presidential election is obviously the one that the kids know most about, even though our other lessons, we try to make clear that there's a lot of levels that can be influenced. But your point is very well taken. So thank you. Anyway, okay, so you can see that most of us make our decisions based on policy, and I'll go back up to this one. We were really well split on how well we think we understand the president's job. This one was, do we have clarity on the previous work experience? And most of us have not a lot of clarity. So this is an example of the kind of feedback that you can give to the students once they have filled out their poll. All right, so let's see if I can now get back to the right slides. I'm hoping you're seeing a slide that says what actually is the job of the president now. Okay. Okay, so we are going to skip to the next slide. Okay. So remembering that as a voter, you're really the boss and you're hiring somebody to do a particular job. What are we actually hiring for? And how would you describe it? What are the main responsibilities? All right. You're going to be using a Jamboard, and that requires the chat again. So let me get back to my chat. All right. Would you please click on that link for me? And what it should do is bring you to a Jamboard, which is where we can all share our thoughts. All right. On the left-hand side, for those of you who haven't used a Jamboard before, there are a couple of icons. You can use a pen, an eraser. You can use, you can point things out. You can select things. You can use a sticky note, which is what we're going to be using today. And then there are a couple of other things. You can put in a picture or a circle or a text box. So what I'd like you to do is to click on the sticky note, and I would like you to decide who you're going to hire as leader of your country. What do you think we're actually hiring for? How would you describe the president's main responsibilities and what the qualifications are for that job? So there's a lot of questions there. Read them again to yourself and then grab a sticky note and add what you see to the Jamboard. This is usually one that comes up. I'm just going to enlarge those a little so I can see the type better. Good communication skills, good visionary person, somebody who's knowledgeable. Chief executive, so you should have experience in government. Sorry, I didn't mean to move that when you were moving it. Demonstrates an understanding of the impact. Somebody to keep our country first. Implement and enforce the laws made by Congress. Quick thinker.
That's a good one.
Empathetic, cares about all citizens. Carries out the policies or the wishes of what I'd like. Good. All right. So those are some really good, okay, honest. All right. Do you notice that we're again talking about staying issue agnostic and nonpartisan? So there are a lot of things on this board that I feel really strongly about, and I would love to say, oh boy, is that true? Or something like that. If you're making a presentation in a school, you've got to remain issue agnostic and you've got to remain nonpartisan. So that's a really important thing to remember. But these are all really good observations, things that are important in a president. Okay, if I were talking to students, I would ask them if they recognize the document that's on there, but I know you all do. So the job description of the president can actually be found in the US Constitution. Article 2 is where it's found, and that says the executive power of the president or shall be vested in the president of the United States. And as you heard Lisa say, you can add, you know, the colonists, when they first came here, the last thing they wanted was a monarch. So the most important thing to them was to have a kind of government where they would have more control. The president's branch, the president's job is part of our executive branch of government, which holds all of the executives or the leaders. And at the state level, that would be the governor, and at the local level, that would be your mayor. There are other branches of government in the United States, the legislative, which are the lawmakers, and the judicial, which are the Supreme Court justices. And having three branches of government was one of the ways our founders hoped that we would retain some balance in our government so that a monarch wouldn't emerge. We're going to try using a couple of Jamboards again. Oh, I've got a second slide here. The responsibilities and the qualifications of the president. All right, the first slide pops in and it shows what the actual responsibilities of the president are. And there really aren't that many. He's only obligated to give Congress a State of the Union speech from time to time. And he also has to ask Congress to consider measures that he feels or she feels are expedient and necessary. The only qualifications necessary are for a president to be a natural born citizen, at least 35, and reside in the US for 14 years. All right, so let's look a little more closely at what Article 2 says the president is responsible for doing. He's supposed to serve as commander-in-chief of the armed forces. He executes and enforces the laws created by Congress. He appoints cabinet members, ambassadors, and Supreme Court judges. He signs legislation into law or vetoes bills enacted by Congress, but he doesn't actually write the laws. He negotiates and signs treaties. He issues executive orders, which are supposed to clarify and further existing laws. And he extends pardons and clemencies for federal crimes, except for impeachment. But now let's focus on you and what you really want in a US president. I'm going to give you a second or two to think about what your answer would be to that little box that's on the screen. I want a president who is, and we're going to use the Jamboard again. And I'd like you to finish that sentence stem for yourself. I'd like a president who is what? And you can add more than one thing if you want. You don't have to stick to just one. A woman, intelligent, capable, not afraid to make bold decisions, empathetic and intelligent, thinks about the bigger picture, knowledgeable, strong listening skills, has a spine, fully aware of the roles and responsibilities, empathetic and knows about issues. And I'm sure we could go on and on. But this is another instance where you're going to have to be careful if you present not to show a leaning one way or the other. The kids may, and if they do, that's okay. And if they're challenged, or if somebody in the class says, oh, that's ridiculous, then we go back to the message that is an important part of every single one of our lessons. And that is that when people have an opinion, it's true for them. It doesn't have to be true for you. And our job here is not to try to change somebody's mind, but it is our job to be respectful and to listen and to try to understand what that person is saying or is feeling. So it's a way to kind of tamp down any animosity that might arise and just remind them of some of their civic responsibilities. Okay, so let's take a look back here. Okay, so you might have said, maybe you chose inspiring or fair or analytical or honest or one of those statements. Identifying what you really want in a leader can help you imagine what those people are like. What do you really want in terms of qualities in the person that we put in the office? So I think this is the teacher side of me now talking to you personally. I think you can see that part of this is trying to get young people to realize that issues are important because we have worked with them on issues, but it's also important to look at the personal qualities of the people who occupy important offices, because those impact the way they do things, not just what policies they believe in. So let's explore it a little further. We're going to have a poll this time. And I'd like you to copy in that poll into your thing. This is the form that you saw used in Lisa's thing. And I'm going to ask you just to do the first one so that we don't run out of time in the entire presentation, since I messed up 5 minutes at least. So pick 3 of the previous experiences that you think are important in a leader. Once you've chosen 3, just click submit, which is down at the bottom.
So we're just doing the first top,
Just the first question.
the first question. Okay.
Right. Just in the interest of time. Okay. This time we have a bar graph, and you can see that the thing that most people value is international experience. But whoa, that's interesting. Look at that. Okay, as they come in, we have changed our perception of who the president should be if we're talking of a whole group. So pretty much equal for community organizing, community service, international experience, and legislative experience. And then just a little bit less important is academic excellence, executive experience, and governance experience. And absolutely unimportant is domestic experience and military experience. So and every time you do this, you're going to get a different set of skills or attributes that are important to the kids. It's just fascinating. Okay, so let's go back. Okay. So when we frame a choice around the leadership qualities and not specific candidates, we might end up with a very different view of what matters. The leadership criteria worksheet that was in the folder can really help you work through that for yourself if you're interested. All right, we're going to go into breakout rooms for just a couple of minutes now. I'm going to give you maybe 2 minutes because I just want you to have the experience, not come to the final decision. But what your job in the breakout group this time is going to be for you to share with the others in your room what you personally feel are the most important characteristics of a good leader. You're going to reflect on the differences among you. And then you're going to try to create a snapshot that all of you agree to. And then have a spokesperson share that with the other group